Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is an NFL insider for ESPN and co-host of the Fantasy Focus Football podcast. He also just so happens to be one of the most well-informed, well-spoken, and kindest people in football media. Field, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Well, after that introduction, I do feel a responsibility, Taylor, to live up to expectations. You're extremely kind to say that, and I'm honored to be on the show. I'm looking forward to talking football and probably a lot of Patriots football specifically with you.
Yes, sir. But first of all, we just got out of all the hecticness of the draft. You know, there's all this prep. And then when you're actually going through it, this was my first time actually having to cover it live. And it took me days to recover. So how do you feel finally being on the other end of things?
Yeah, it's funny that we've done a couple of shows since the draft was over, and we've done grade shows. We've done a 2024 look ahead. We've done just sort of general analysis. And there have been a couple of times recently where I've thought about a prospect, not a day one player, but a player that was expected to go in the middle rounds of the draft. And I've said, like, wait, where did he end up again? Like, what round was he taken in?
Right.
It's like, oh, okay, Julius Brents went in the third round of the Colts. Okay, got it. All right, yeah, okay. Had to remind myself where some of these players landed because you spend so much time in the months leading up to it not envisioning them as a fit for a particular team because there's so many different ways the draft can play out, but rather just sort of evaluating them as prospects independent of where they're going to land. And I'd say by the time training camp rolls around, I probably won't have too many of those slip-ups, but we'll see. It always makes it kind of a fun time of the year to go from prepping for the draft to prepping for the season.
Right. It's kind of a speed round, you know, it's just, you need the time to get acquainted with all these new faces and new places. Speaking of which, so you have great insight on the league in general. I'm more of a Pat-centric guy. I try to keep my ear to the ground where I can, but from your perspective, relative to, the league landscape and obviously these way too early draft grades, they change. That's why they're way too early. But how did you feel the Patriots did in their draft strategy relative to maybe the rest of the league and, their ability to get more athletic, address their needs, things like that?
Yeah, first of all, I want people that have an issue with draft grades to be reminded that they're for entertainment purposes, right? The people that hand out those grades aren't necessarily held accountable. It's not like if you were low on a draft a few years ago and ended up being great, you are unable to give out grades in future drafts. Vice versa, if you really liked a draft and the players all ended up being duds, again, it doesn't mean that you can't go forward with draft grades. It's entertainment form. And frankly, right after the draft, there's not a lot of other movement around the NFL. So it's good to have something that we spend months leading up to react to after the fact. So I'm okay with draft grades in general. I think when you're assessing a team's draft, you have to decide what lens you're going to choose it from. And if you are an NFL team, in a perfect world, the draft is serving not just now, but also the future. And in a perfect world, beyond the perfect world I just laid out, you're always drafting for value. You're not drafting for need. You always want to be drafting a player commensurate where that player is being taken. I think if you look at the Patriots' first 3 rounds, and then we can go forward with the last 4 rounds, I think a lot of people feel like those 3 players were actually kind of a nice sweet spot of really good value and really good players too, because at needs, I should say. Christian Gonzalez obviously will make a major mark on this defense from day one. He was a top 10-ish prospect. Everybody's eyes are a bit different, but I felt with the Patriots in the first 3 rounds got really, really strong value for those 3 players, not just Christian Gonzalez, but also Keion White and Marte Mapu. I think when you look at the Patriots' needs coming into the draft for 2023, the most pressing needs probably felt, to me at least, as cornerback, perimeter cornerback specifically, someone that had some size, even more specifically than that, some developmental upside at the tackle spot, either side of the line. And then I would have argued that one more playmaker might have been a 2023 need. That being said, if you look past 2023, you are staring at the barrel of needs that don't seem quite as pertinent, that could become pertinent in 2024, right? And maybe interior offensive line is a bigger need then than it is right now. Maybe pass rusher is a bigger need then than it is right now, right? Matthew Judon is 2 years away from becoming a free agent. So a year from now, we'll be in a contract year. And then Josh Uche is going to be a free agent after this season. And if you think that Keion White is a reasonable facsimile of some of what those 2 guys do, well, then you are kind of planning ahead while also helping your pass rush for 2023. So I don't think the Patriots draft in any way, shape, or form was like a miscalculation of what they may have needed in the future or the right now, because really that to get a perimeter corner at 17 in a draft where I think there were two that kind of separated themselves from the rest, Christian Gonzalez and Devin Witherspoon, that to me might have been the best pick in the first round when you marry value, need, and where he ended up going. So I think the Patriots draft was kind of solid. As a matter of fact, I'm going to kind of borrow this train of thought from my colleague Mel Kiper Jr., who was the draft grader at ESPN, who I think he had no team lower than a B- this year. Because it didn't feel like there was that many things that were so out of left field in the draft that it was cause to give out a grade that was below that B- mark.
And I feel like the Lions were the only team that you'd think maybe, they get below that threshold because of the early value that they got in the first round. But when you look at their team, they got those kind of tough players like a linebacker or a running back. They got players that fit that kind of style. So I would agree. Looking back at the draft, I was like, I think teams made out pretty well. It's just, coaching situations, how things play out, yada, yada.
Yeah. And I think with the Lions, the last thing I'll say, and I don't mean to jump in, but with the Lions, I'd say probably the strongest argument for it is that we meaning the collective football community, spent the past year praising the Lions for being so decidedly Lions about them, right? Everything about them feels like it is basically like Dan Campbell's DNA, right?
Yeah.
If you go look at the players that they drafted in the first 3 rounds specifically, let's focus on the first 2 rounds, actually. 4 players that feel to me like Lions, right? Feel to me like players that are going to fit in culturally with the Lions right away. Now, do they go a few spots higher than maybe they should have? I don't know. We'll find out. I'm from the New England area. I'm old enough to remember when Logan Mankins was the worst pick of the, whatever that was, 2002 NFL draft or 2005 NFL draft, excuse me. And he went on to become, one of the Patriots' best players ever. So I think sometimes while I 100% support and agree with draft grades, I also think that there is an admission when you are giving out draft grades right after the fact that, on the sometimes you'll see like a sweepstakes on TV or something. It'll be like, hey, subject to change on the bottom, right? Draft grades are subject to change. And maybe the Lions draft grade looks a lot different a year from now because 2 of those 4 players are not just contributors right away, but playing at a very high level. Moreover, that the other 2 are starting and you've got 4 starters in the first 50 or so picks. Like that to me is pretty good value and return from one draft.
Absolutely. And then so flipping back to the Patriots real quick. So we talked about value versus team need necessarily. And going into the draft, like you mentioned, maybe pass catcher, whether it was a receiver or running back, a tight end, seemed like a really pressing need. And obviously the Patriots didn't address it till the tail end of the draft. Now, from your perspective, there's a bit of speculation over whether people are asking too much of Bill O'Brien with the weapons that he currently has in the younger talent where the explosiveness is, they're not quite proven yet. So from your perspective, do you think the Patriots have the receiving talent and even the tackle talent around Mac Jones and for Bill O'Brien to bring out the best in both of those guys and turn this into a team where the offense was a true liability last season to getting more on track where they're not losing you games, they're holding up their end of the bargain and maybe even exceeding expectation?
Yeah, so first of all, I don't want to make it as simple as like it's just going to be this way. But if I were to ask you, who obviously follows this team, does an amazing job covering them on a day-to-day basis, how dissimilar or what is the gap between the 2021 skill group and the 2023 skill group on paper? If you think about Jacoby Myers, Nelson Aguilar, Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, Kendrick Bourne in 2021, I think those were let's call those the top 5-ish pass catchers relative to Mike Gesicki, Juju Smith-Schuster, Hunter Henry, Tyquan Thornton, Ramondre Stevenson, Kendrick Bourne. Take Ramondre out because I didn't include a running back the first time. I would argue, and I could be way wrong here, that group is on paper fairly comparable. I don't know that it's necessarily a whole lot better or a whole lot worse. That Patriots team in 2021 averaged 26.6 points per game, 7th best in the NFL, won 10 games. What was different then compared to not just last year, but the question that people are trying to get answered this year? It was the offensive line. That was a strength for the Patriots in 2021. Trent Brown played really well on the left side. You had guys really across the board that were playing excellent football. Ted Karras, that was his final year in New England, but he earned himself a 3-year, $18 million deal as a result of that, right? I mean, you had a guy in Michael Onwenu who is maybe the Patriots' best offensive player right now, one of the best guards in the NFL, who was a 6th offensive lineman that season because of the way that the interior offensive line was holding up. So I think the offensive line, I believe fundamentally in football that a good offensive line can offset an average skill group, more so than a good skill group can offset an average offensive line, right? Mm-hmm. The Dolphins are maybe the exception because they were so good offensively last year, but look at what happened when they started to really face the meat of their schedule, when they played the San Franciscos of the world. All of a sudden that offense started to look a lot more pedestrian because as great as it is to have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, the only way to stress a defense vertically is to give your quarterback enough time. So I know the Patriots skill group is going to be a talking point for the next, 4 months until the games begin. I would counter with the idea that while it's important to focus on the skill group and they need Juju to be an effective player, and I believe Mike Gesicki almost in practicality can be viewed as a big receiver, not necessarily a tight end, they need the offensive line to be a whole lot better. And the pieces are in place there for it to be good. They got depth, a lot of depth now all of a sudden. And you have, I think you can feel pretty darn comfortable with at least 3 of the starters, right? You know that the 2 guard spots are most likely going to be Michael Enu and also Cole Strange. And you know David Andrews is going to be your center. So they have all of a sudden 4, 5, 6 options maybe at tackle. If you square away that offensive line, I think the operation looks a whole lot better. I'm not saying that they're necessarily going to lead the NFL in points, but I think the offense can be good enough if the offensive line holds up its end of the bargain.
I'd actually love to get a little deeper into the offensive line because I think, from the outside perspective, there's a lot of names, especially the free agent signings, a lot of veterans that, for one reason or another, don't inspire a ton of confidence if you're thinking they're going to start 17 games plus for you. But they did get a lot of intriguing young players in the draft as well. So what do you think of the guys that they did get in free agency? Riley Reed, Calvin Anderson. Obviously, they re-signed Connor McDermott and Yanni Kajus to a tender. And then the 3 guys they got in the 4th and 5th rounds as well.
So I like to follow the money in some cases when it comes to team building because it does help you give an idea of maybe where the team views this player. And I think that the deal that I thought stood out to me the most in terms of the financial commitment that suggested starter was Riley Reef, right? Because it's a 1-year deal. I think it was like $5 million guaranteed,
something like that.
Which I don't think on a 1-year contract you're paying a guy $5 million if the vision is for him to just be a backup.
Right.
Which a backup can be extremely valuable when you have injuries and just the tolls of the season, right? I mean, a guy just has about an off week, and next thing you know, the Patriots have been unafraid to pull guys from a game in the middle of the game and eventually bring them back out there. But we have seen a carousel of offensive linemen in the past during some of their best seasons, right? Dante Scarnecchia, the legend, has been unafraid to do that. And if he's willing to do it, then I think every offensive line coach should at least be mindful and considerate of it. So I think Riley Reef has a real chance to start for this team. He will be a right tackle. That's where he has played most recently and been a starter most recently. He finished off last year on a high note for the Bears, got better as the season went on, an incredible dude as well. Then you look at the rest of the contracts. Trent Brown should be the front runner to be the left tackle. With Trent, though, I think the story of his career is going to be defined by, at his best, hard to do much with him. I mean, a pass rusher is basically just hoping that, he either gets tired or has a bad day because between his length, strength, and nastiness, he's got a chance to be a dominant player when he's at his apex. But when he's not, then all of a sudden the wheels can fall off quickly. He's in the final year of his contract. And if you look at where he is age-wise, I would think he'd be extremely motivated to pursue that one last bite at the apple as far as contracts go. So Trent Brown probably is the front runner, but the commitment to Calvin Anderson was enough that it shouldn't be a stunner if he's playing meaningful snaps, right? They didn't sign him just to sit around and, collect dust on the sideline. So that's how I would view it.
Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs. Because right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets. If your first bet doesn't win, you got to get the app. The app's the way to go. It is so easy to use. You get great promotions every day with the app. It's safe and secure, and you get paid instantly. How about that? Instant cash with the FanDuel app. There's no better place to bet all your playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/Boston and get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/Boston. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA.
As far as the interior players go in the draft, Sidy Sow and Jake Andrews and Atonio, Mafi, that's 3 guys who I think all have a chance to be on the 53-man roster this season. You would certainly hope 2 fourth-round picks are on the game day roster a decent amount, but all of them I think are players that will be dressed and active this year while also obviously figuring in to the future of this roster in a meaningful way as well. And if there's been one lesson that we've been reminded of over the past couple of years, not just in New England, but around the NFL, is that padding that depth at offensive line is never a bad strategy because, first of all, players can be up and down in terms of performance. Second of all, it's hard to hold up for the rigors of a 17, maybe even a 21-game season for those that make it all the way to the Super Bowl.
Absolutely. And we saw even last year, you had 33-year-old James Ferentz in there as a backup when David Andrews went down, and you saw a significant decline in quality. Ferentz, he's a backup. He can only do as much as he can physically do, but it really emphasized how much integrity on that interior offensive line really mattered for a pocket passer like Mac Jones.
That's a good point, because I think, and this is not to make, James Ferentz like the scapegoat of 2022, right? But I don't know how many players on the Patriots roster right now who have a hypothetical or like a real path to a role, you would feel like, in baseball, they use wins above replacement as one of the key stats that people now measure player value on, right? And every once in a while, there's a team that's playing like a shortstop that's got like a -4 wins above replacement. You're like, that player's not above the arbitrary threshold that we just decided upon here, right? And I think the Patriots now have the depth where there's enough investment organizationally that if something happens to Mike Onwenu or Cole Strange or David Andrews, like the idea of Sidy Sow coming in and playing a guy who's a 4th-round pick, started 56 games in college, or Jake Andrews, a guy who started a ton of games in college, like to me, the depth feels way stronger for the Patriots this year than it was last year. And that's across the board, not just on offense and defense. I know it's the least sexy thing, and it seems like Patriots fans sometimes get frustrated by the fact that the team cares about special teams. But look at what happened to them last year. The special teams became, it was not covered as much as the offense because the offense operated the way that it did, but the special teams let them down in a major way last year. And people can debate the merits of using draft picks on a kicker and a punter, but if the Patriots hit on both of those players, and this goes to every team that drafts a kicker or a punter, if you hit on a draft pick at a specialist spot, assuming it's not like in the 2nd round Roberto Aguayo style, it's automatically a bargain. Like it really is. If Ryland's on I don't know what the number is, but 4-year, something like, $5 million deal, that's $1.25 million per year. Like top tier kickers are going for $5, $6, $7 million now. If he's good enough to be a 4-year starter, it's going to be a great discount. And the last time the Patriots used a 4th-round pick on a kicker, Steven Gostkowski, really paid off for them for a decade. So the Patriots across the board, including on their special teams units, should be deeper and better.
Absolutely. And that's something that helps everybody because, like you said, it's not a sexy talking point necessarily. And obviously special teams, I'm not even someone who fully understands special teams as much as I love to watch the game and study. Exactly. But, they signed Chris Board. Cody Davis comes back. Matt Slater comes back. They add not only to the kicking spots, but also to the coverage, which I think that affects field position. That affects so many
yardage. Yeah.
Absolutely. So
think about last year too. Like just think about, so we can isolate it, kicking and punting. Nick Folk, absolute, total stud. Like the way he rejuvenated his career in New England deserves a ton of praise, right? Incredibly well respected as well. I think it was the Detroit game where they bypassed like a 46-yard field goal.
Yeah.
And I know that Gillette has the open ends of the stadium that with wind makes it tough for anybody. But at some point you got to be above a certain level with your kicking unit. Like 50 yards and in should be a try every time, unless it's like a driving rainstorm and it's, Buffalo style in 2021 Monday Night Football conditions, right? Patriots have added length to their field goal unit. Remember, kickoffs were an issue for the Patriots last year once Jake Bailey got hurt, and obviously Jake underperformed as well. And that tied into Michael Pilardi. Both of those guys, we're talking about like 38, 39-yard net average punts. Like you can't afford that. Yeah. You need Behringer to be a 40, 45, 44, 45, 46-yard net punting average over the course of a game, over the course of a season. That adds up so dramatically. And if your offense isn't, the Chiefs or the Bills or somebody like that, I think those hitting yards really pile up because the Patriots are going to play solid defense. They're going to find a way to make things really difficult on whoever it is that they face in a given week. They got to be more complimentary than they were last year. And remarkably, for all the things that went wrong last year and all the stuff that everybody's talking about how like it felt like rock bottom. You and I are both from the area. That was rock bottom. They went 8-9. That's pretty amazing that like a team could go 8-9 and be playing for the playoffs in week 18 during a rock bottom season. I know that I'm not trying to make excuses or for people that are in charge or players on the roster, but part of what's happened in recent years is the context, right? It's the fact that Patriots were so good for so long, they taper off a little bit, and all of a sudden it feels like the sky fell. Meanwhile, the rest of the conference has gotten really good. Yeah. This Patriots roster, if you put it in the NFC, I think people are talking about them as a playoff lock, or at least a playoff, a strong contender, right?
It's just a rock fight in the AFC.
Yeah, it's a chemically imbalanced league right now. It's what the NBA West was for all those years, what the AFC is. And it used to be that the path of least resistance was the Eastern Conference. Now the path of least resistance is the NFC. I mean, I'm not saying it's the only reason, but do you don't think that Derek Carr thought about that when he was deciding where he wanted to sign? He had the Jets plus the Saints plus the Panthers on his roster, on his radar. I'm sure he was mindful of the idea that if he goes to the Jets, he plays in a division that has 3 other very capable teams and maybe a Super Bowl favorite in the Bills.
Absolutely. And then in the Bills, we're talking about how close they were to actually being competitive. They were in playoff contention in the last week of the season, and they'll have 2 return touchdowns. So, hitting yardage, hitting points, you know what I'm saying? It's not the defense, it's special teams units. So we've talked about kind of just briefly going back to offense, just because I feel like we need to address Mac Jones directly. Because we mentioned, he has competent receivers. Like, he's got veterans who have resumes where you're saying, okay, I have an idea of how they're going to produce in my scheme. The offensive line, the only spot you're kind of worried about is right tackle, but they got bodies. Riley Reef, as you said, is competent, got better for the Bears as the season went on last year. So what does Mac Jones have to do to, play better than he did last year? Obviously tough circumstances, but, at the end of the day, you have to perform as well. So where does he need to step up this season? And also, where can Bill O'Brien kind of make his life easier and bring out the best in Mac?
But I think you can probably measure somebody's sort of interest or belief in Mac Jones. If they allow to dismiss the 2022 season, then you have somebody that believes in Mac Jones. If they don't allow to dismiss the 2022 season, then you have somebody that is not believing in Mac Jones. Yep. I believe Mac Jones has a chance to be very, very good quarterback in the NFL. There are a few aliens in the league, right? Patrick Mahomes. I don't want to make everything always about, the best player on the best team, but Patrick Mahomes could be dropped anywhere. And I would think that team automatically becomes a playoff contender, right? So there are a lot of other quarterbacks where context is the most important thing. A year ago, if you and I were having a conversation about Daniel Jones, and we were in a group of 20 people, 15 of them would be laughing at the idea of Daniel Jones even being a starter for the Giants this past year, right? Like, oh, good idea, like running it back for more. How long until Tyrod Taylor takes over as a starting quarterback, right? There are other quarterbacks where it either goes the same way or the other way, right? I mean, like Matthew Stafford a year ago was in the conversation for the best quarterback in the NFL coming off of the Rams Super Bowl championship, right? Now people are saying, should he just retire anyway? Is the team going to be terrible? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So quarterback context is so important in my opinion. And so if you're the Patriots, I'm not saying Mac doesn't have to do his thing. He has to do his thing. He has to hold up his end of the bargain. But Patriots have made dramatic strides in getting him back on track. And if you're Mac, here's some areas that I think you have to identify if you are Mac Jones going into this season, right? First of all, I need complete and utter pre-snap command. Patriots offense needs to be far more efficient this year in and out of the huddle. Now, maybe that's not on Mac Jones. Maybe I tend to believe that some of that is not on Mac Jones from this past year, right? But I know Bill O'Brien is going to run a tight ship. Mac Jones, I know, can keep up with that tight ship. I need to see that this year. I want to be in and out of the huddle fast. I want to be at the line of scrimmage. I want to be barking commands to guys. I want to see more pre-snap disruption for the defense. You want to hear a guy barking out cadence before the snap, drawing people off sides, organized chaos at line of scrimmage, which you can see from some of the very best. That'll develop more and more over time, but that to me is always a sign of a quarterback that is in command. Move on from there. Once the ball is snapped, Mac Jones, where he was so good for the first 12, 13 weeks of his rookie season, was he didn't have too many major mistakes, right? Did a really good job of reading coverage, taking what he could get him. Think about that Tampa game, which Tom Brady, the greatest player of all time, returns to New England. And one of the narratives after the game was Mac Jones. I think it was like 17 straight completions, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever the number was, it was a lot, right? And it's like, take what the defense gives you. You may recall going further back than that. The training camp practice against the Giants, where it was like Mac Jones. This was when Cam, I think, had the medical thing where he was out for like 5 days.
Yeah. And then Mac stepped up.
And it's like, okay, so he has the accuracy to, if it's open, hit it. Okay, hit it this year again, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you make a mistake, and every quarterback does, don't repeat it twice. That's something that I think needs to change this year that didn't change enough last year. Too many repeated mistakes from Mac. And those two things, the pre-snap command and then, see window, hit window, or anticipate window and hit that window.
Mm-hmm.
That to me, I think is a good starting point for Mac Jones. But he's super capable, and I know that we read a ton into body language and press conference body language. It's hard. You got to kind of distance yourself from that in some cases. And, that Patriots locker room loves Mac Jones. And I think they have a lot of reason to believe in Mac Jones. Now he has a chance to prove to everybody that he can be a guy in this league, because I know that oftentimes the best quarterbacks give you the chance to win, give you the best chance to win. But there are teams that can be really successful by having a very good quarterback, very good defense, being well coached. Right now, at this juncture of his career, right now, that's the model for the Patriots. Like, he doesn't need to be a top 3 quarterback for them to win big next year. But if he's a top 12 quarterback, this team's going to be in business.
Right. And I like that you mentioned the pre-snap operation as well, because a lot of what I think held them back last season, obviously Mac has to execute. But when you talk about how many times they shot themselves in the foot, like coming out of the huddles and you're getting delayed games, all these pre-snap penalties where you're in good position, 2nd and 5 becomes 2nd and 10. And then everyone knows that cross stagger or levels is coming, and then it just gets the offense behind schedule. And you have promising drives where you put things together. Then you get behind the 8 ball and things just get a lot more screwy. And that makes it hard when you have an offense that likes to be timing-based, execution, efficiency, and you're making your own mistakes that aren't even inflicted by the other side.
I always say, and this is boiling it down into a way too simple form, but I always say that good offense is dictating, good defense is reacting. Mm-hmm. Last year, the Patriots were reacting too much on offense. And you go and look at the quarterbacks that have mastery of the huddle pre-snap, that are getting in and out of the huddle with plenty of time left on the play clock to go to the line, read the defense, and try to screw them up a bit before the snap. It may not be a 1,000% batting average, but I bet you way more often than not, that's a good offense. And I think Mac Jones has the intellect and has the command to do that. I think that's one of the challenges for this year. And I'm not trying to say that nothing was taken for granted, in my opinion, about Tom Brady, but you go back and look at some of those outstanding years. Some of it was just complete mastery. It was like he was designing the offense and calling the plays on the fly. He wasn't, right? But in some ways it felt like he was, and he probably could in some cases. That's how much he knew that offense. That's how brilliant of a mind and how brilliant of a structure they had developed over those years together. I think that's a goal for Mac, because I want him, if you're watching Mac Jones, you're a Patriots fan, you're saying, Mac is an extension of Bill O'Brien, right? The person that we are entrusting to build this offense. Right. You want to see it from these young quarterbacks. I want to see that command from Mac Jones to believe that he's got a chance to be a really, really good player for a long time.
Absolutely. So I just wanted your quick takes on the 6th round selection the Patriots took at wide receiver. I may be a little too excited about him because, obviously their 6th round picks, the track record isn't great. But you got a guy in Kayshon Boutte who was thought to be a 1st round kind of guy before last season. Obviously, you have laundry list of concerns. I'm not going to address them here. They're pretty easy to find. And then you got a guy like Demario Douglas, who's undersized, of course, but is in that mold of a lot of guys in this receiver class where they're undersized, but they're super twitchy, super fast, and play bigger than they are. And obviously with the Patriots, the more you can do is a big mantra for them. And they have a history with those undersized guys. So what do you think the possibility is that those two players can contribute in their first seasons? And what do you think maybe the potential impact is if they do manage to sneak onto the roster?
Yeah, I was going to say, first of all, we got to cross the make the roster threshold, right? Absolutely. Because if assuming health, and there's obviously it's very difficult to assume health, but as of right now, you would think the following receivers are locks, right? Tyquan Thornton, Kendrick Bourne, Devontae Parker, and obviously Juju Smith-Schuster, right? I know those two guys in the middle, the two veterans, are on the final year of their contract and no guaranteed money. So I'm not I have no information here, but obviously the investment financially is also different for them than it is for somebody like Juju, right? But those 4, I assume, are locks. That probably gives you 1, maybe 2 spots maximum amongst your other wide receivers. So what do you get out of Boutte? What do you get out of Demario Douglas? What do you get out of other guys that have been in the pipeline a little bit longer, haven't ever been 53-man regulars? That's the question that I don't have the answer to right now. As far as Douglas goes, I kind of looked at him as like discount version of Tank Dell from Houston. Two guys who just dominated from the slot, route running masters. They went 3 rounds apart, which I think is reflective in like the overall skill set. I think for Boutte, I think that the question is just whether he's got the opportunity now, right? Pretty much everything that could go wrong this past year for him from the season of the pre-draft process did go wrong. And so he has a very simple question to answer right now. He's now got an opportunity. There's no more speculating about where he'll go, who will draft him, how far he'll fall, how high he'll go. The cards have now been played. He has to make a choice. If he taps into what he has, good route runner, good after the catch as well, physical enough, like he's got a chance. But not a fast guy, ran poorly during the pre-draft process, so he's not going to win with speed, right? And if he doesn't keep his head on straight, this is the NFL. The margin for error is so thin. And as a 6th-round pick, you're guaranteed nothing in this league. So I'm not saying that I'm tempering expectations for them any more than I would a 6th-round pick elsewhere, right? I'm just sort of playing the numbers game, right? If a 6th-round pick makes the roster, that is like a good step 1. But I would say Douglas maybe intrigues me even more, which is kind of contrary to where most people have been, just because he has so much of that short area suddenness and such a crafty route runner from the slot. And while Kendrick Bourne can do some of that, and Juju can do a little bit of that, not nearly as much as these two, a little bit though. Like that to me is somewhere, if I'm him, I'm saying I can envision the role right now on this roster.
Yeah, all right. I needed that objectivity a little bit because those are the 2 first guys I broke down. Like Boutte, I saw.
Get excited. That's allowed. You should do that.
I feel like, when you think about the Edelman role, put him at Z outside motion, almost impossible to cover on those short routes and just, yak opportunities. And then I saw Demario Douglas is more okay. Amendola's route tree, they're very similar, but he gives you that vertical element. So excited about those guys. But of course, expectations need to be, down at earth level.
No. I mean, you're allowed to, it's May, June, July are for excitement across the league, right? Everybody's 30. Everybody is 0-0. All 32 teams are 0-0. And you're going to read a lot of stuff over the next few months that's going to sound hyperbolic, and it might prove to be hyperbolic, but every team right now has reason to believe. And I don't think that makes the coverage inferior. To me, I think it's important to try to examine why a team invested in a player, because even if the numbers show us that many 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th round picks don't pan out and play 4 years of their rookie contract, the teams are not just like lighting picks on fire intentionally. So I think it's worth doing a deep dive and figuring out what did New England see in those 2 receivers that compelled them to use a 6th-round investment on them.
Now, I'm going to close this out with a defensive guy who kind of fits in that mold of, value. We mentioned him at the top, Marte Mapu.
Yeah, fun one.
I was visibly jazzed when they got him, but I feel like that wasn't necessarily the sentiment throughout Patriots Nation because, of course, smaller school prospect. There's not a lot of tape on him, so I understand. But I kind of caught wind once the Patriots got him in for a top 30 visit and was like, this guy, he is Kyle Duggar as an actual linebacker, modern linebacker type. So what do you think of his skill set, what he could bring? Because I see him as a potential blue chip who at that second level of defense, linebacker, maybe slot corner, and some of those big nickel packages could do a lot of damage for them.
One of the most impressive athletes of the week at the Senior Bowl, by far. The guy looked like he totally belonged. This was a player who just slid through the cracks throughout much of the pre-draft process. He was a late add to the Senior Bowl, was not invited to the combine, and that's probably because Sacramento State. But Dalton Kincaid didn't even play high school football until like his junior or senior year, started off at University of San Diego. Like there's a million stories like that now in football because kids are either prioritizing other sports, which is totally fine as well, or believe it or not, like not every school is like, Mater Dei or like one of these Long Beach Polys where like, these, like you watch these guys on Friday nights on ESPN2, right? Like not every program is like that. So I think that Marte Mapu was a classic slide through the cracks type of player, but incredible athlete and obviously plays like he is about 50 pounds and 2 inches taller than he actually is. And Bill Belichick, that is of like the signature traits on defense. One of them is definitely a guy who plays through contact, not around contact. And you mentioned Kyle Duggar, right? I was actually just thinking about this recently because I saw Ike Ekwonu come up on my timeline, the Panthers' first-round pick last year in the 6th round.
I know.
And I was like, remember when Kyle Duggar baptized him in his first preseason game last year? Marte Mapu is going to do that to somebody this year. So I don't know exactly where he fits. That might be the challenge for the Patriots. Is he a safety? Is he as a linebacker? If he's a linebacker, our team's going to say, all right, we're going to run at you. And if they are, can he continue to eat glass consistently? And if he does, he's going to be around for a long time. The Patriots' first 3 picks could legitimately contribute in a major way this year on defense. And I think the floor for Marte Mapu is being a total freak on special teams, because that body type with that speed is built to just demolish people on special teams.
Man,
and do a lot more, by the way. Do a lot more. But I'm just saying, like, if you're looking for the optimistic case, it's a whole lot more than that. If you're looking for the floor, like Patriots are going to see a player with hair on fire on special teams.
Man, I could keep this going for a lot longer, but I know you're a busy guy, so I'm going to let you get out of here. But Field, thank you so much for joining us. Seriously, if there's anything at all that you would like to plug, please fire away.
I want you guys to go make sure you're following Tayler and read all of his content every single day. How about that?
Oh, man, I'll take it. The man himself. Field Yates, everyone. ESPN's best and brightest, in my humble opinion. Man, thank you so much again.
Thank you, sir.